Okay, so here I'm going to continue the session that I was doing before, and I still didn't check whether I've used this title before, but I'm using it at least in a little bit of a different way. So let's address that fallacy that things are the way they are because that's the way they're meant to be, but you can look at the origin point and see how they came to be. It's kind of arbitrary, subjective. Every era of human history would indicate this. Like, you know, every era believes itself to be right. The vast majority of people are taken in by that. So when you look at normalcy, here's the problem, right? Normalcy, or like what's common, is insisted upon, right? Like, oh, this thing is good because it's common, and it's common because it's good. It's kind of a self-fulfilling fallacy. The problem is, how did that normalcy come to be? Did people think and decide and choose to do that on their own, or are they pressured? Is it manufactured? Because if people were truly free and then they decide for themselves, they might decide something else. So what it means is, it just means, oh, we share this in common, the commonality of contrivance. Like, we've been exposed to the same power structure indoctrinating us. We've been exposed to the same influences and media and things like that. So to insist upon those things and take pride in them is kind of like, oh, look how relatable this person is. It's like one trained animal relating to another. Oh, we both have the same shackles. We both have the same cage. We both have the same, look at my name tag. Look at my, my little collar, right? I get why that's done, but that's basically the nature of the process. Is like, you take pride in that, or you take, you find that relatable, but it just means like, oh, we've both been exposed to the same contrivance. That's what it means, right? We've both been exposed to the same thing. And so what that means is, right, is that really a meaningful thing, right? In other words, it's not really based on anything. In fact, if anything, it's not based on a standard of like, oh, that's the best thing, or based on this criteria, or even based on people's choices. But it's based on, oh, that makes people the easiest to control, or that, that's the easiest thing for society to control, right? And then you're trained to take some gratification from it, gratification of specifying an inherent process to a half-mast state, instead of practicing it freely, fully, inherently, naturally, the way it would naturally be, and framing that as an outward practice, and the half-mast as a gratifying absolute. So a good example of that is specification of the stimuli acme, like being monogamous, being with only one person in a sexual relationship. That is a trained tendency, in the sense that, it's good for the family system, but you take gratification from it as though it's absolute, right, rather than recognizing the purely functional basis. And so what it means is that you're basically able to self-fulfilling fallacy. I can portray it in like folly, favoritism, fiction, stuff like that pretty well too. Like, this thing is popular, you've heard of it, therefore it's good, right? You have like a positive opinion of it. And, oh, you haven't heard of something, therefore it's bad, right? Or you'll dismiss it. The problem with that is you're insisting upon your own ignorance and your own knowledge, which is only a fraction of all the collective human knowledge, and even that collective human knowledge is only a fraction of all that there could be potentially in the universe to know about. So you're insisting upon your own, this is how people are controlled, but they are made to think it's their own idea, right? Basically, you would insist upon your own perceptions, right? What you're familiar with, you would place value on, and what you're unfamiliar with, you'll dismiss, right? That seems like maybe a credible basis, although you're probably giving yourself too much credit, and it's kind of like the non-base of self, ignorance, insistence, right? It's not really a good measure of the whole world and everything and anything like that. But even if you were to use that basis, right, why is it flawed? And why are you being controlled while thinking it's your own idea? Because what you're exposed to is heavily curated and controlled. It was like, oh, you've heard of this thing, but you've only heard of it because you've seen ads for it, or you've only heard of it because you've seen it on the news through some secondary, whatever, influence. So you're reacting not even to your own awareness that you chose to, like, this is where the internet is good or stuff, like, you chose to seek something out. So you've done research on something, and now you're familiar with it because you chose to look into it, because you find it interesting or valuable or whatever, you're curious. So now it's no longer that surface level of, oh, you just happen to see ads for it or see it on TV or hear it mentioned somewhere, therefore it has value, just for that reason alone, not based on any standard, just based on your own familiarity or lack thereof. That's how you define value. That's not a very credible basis, right? That could apply to anything. That's like, right, so if you hadn't heard about that same thing that you have heard about, it would be less valuable. And if you had heard about something else, it would be more valuable. Like, that's not, you might think that's a form of social Darwinism, like, oh, the fact that you heard about it means that people are talking about it or whatever, but it's kind of arbitrary because that is too controlled, right? And the media is often how people do it. So people will see something on TV and then they'll start thinking about it. But if they really cared about that subject, they would have already thought about it before, or, right, it's just too selective, and so you're being controlled, but you don't realize it. You think it's your own idea because it's kind of, what you're exposed to is controlled and treated as though it's absolute or some sort of, it's treated as absolute or like some kind of a weird thing. I don't know. Right, so on a personal level, you shouldn't be that arrogant to think that your perceptions are really credible because, okay, what you've been exposed to has nothing to do with anything. Like, it's just random, right? Whatever culture you happen to live in, whatever influences around you, whatever, when you're younger especially, like, there's nothing really credible about that. And then the second part of it is the fact that even if you did go by that basis, you should always be more in control of it. So you take interest in a subject and you research it, then that's fine. And oddly, that's kind of mocked and ridiculed too. Like, having any passion in any direction or any interest or any knowledge is somehow ridiculed, right, by like this mindless mass who like go along with everything. They're like, oh, they would, there's kind of this culture of like, that would be somehow a bad thing, right? Like, it's somehow arrogant of you, or it's somehow, oh, like you're a know-it-all, this kind of thing. But shouldn't we be more pensive and thoughtful instead of just mindlessly going along with whatever's presented to it? Like, this is one of my expressions that I've used recently a lot. Like, the amount of thought put into something, right, to control you should be commensurate to the amount of thought put into like, you don't give it enough credit. Like, so in other words, a lot of thought is put into a process to try to control you. Like, let's use ads as an example. Every frame of the ad, everything, it's not just by accident. It's not just, oh, that's silly or whatever, authentic. They have a corporate board of CEOs, cynical people trying to make money and psychologically control you and influence you. Every movement, every, angle, everything is deliberate. It's, if you're in one of these rooms with these people, like, that's what it's like. They're carefully curating every last aspect of it. Right, so there's like an absolutist phrase with that too, where I use, like, even when the absolutist makes a mistake, they do it on purpose, and they know how people are going to react and stuff like that. But because they're aware of the nature of the process, right? So everything is within their deliberate aspect, and they don't overextend themselves. But the thing is that you don't overextend, but you, here's the thing. Let me try to say it a little better. Like, the amount of thought put into a process to control you is the same amount of thought you should put into assessing that process, right? And kind of seeing through it. So these big companies put in countless amounts of research and hours and money, and they prep every angle, everything is curated, so they put a lot of thought into it. So shouldn't you put some thought back into it and not take it at face value, because then you're not giving enough credit, and then you will be controlled and influenced by it, instead of thinking, oh, they put a lot of thought into it to try to control and influence, etc. So shouldn't I put an equal amount of thought into it? right? But instead you're like, oh no, take it at face value. It's just an ad. It's just this. It's just that. But it's not just anything. Everything is a process, right? Everything has an influence. So whether whether you're in control of it or controlled by it, that's up to you. But the nature of the process is the same. So it's kind of daunting that people don't want to think about it. But some of these streams get messed up because like my last one says it's 1:39, 1 hour 39 minutes, but it was 37 minutes. It's just like it somehow doesn't end, but then it's also, I don't know. But now I'm using the last one I was using the mobile data, now I'm using the Starlink. And the reason why is, well, I guess that mobile data might still be on though, but whatever. Now the Roam updated. It took a while. I just changed my subscription. It's worth it because I'm going to be using a lot now, but it better be actually unlimited high speed. And again, I'm only streaming in 720p. It's not like a big thing, but you know, it should be good. And I want to mess around with some of that later. I'll do some of the card games. I set everything up, right? I was getting kind of annoyed yesterday trying to do that. So like I have, which ones do I have? Okay. We have Hearthstone, so I can mess around with gimmick decks. We have Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, we can start a new run. We have Marvel Snap, we can start a new run. I tried to transfer that, but I couldn't. And I hadn't done too much in it, but I would have liked to have continued that. And then the 3 that I was able to transfer, obviously Magic the Gathering. I put a good amount of time into that, so that'd be nice to go back to. And Duel Links and Master Duel, which I didn't put a ton of time into, but hopefully there's still some player base, and I'll just mess around with kind of gimmick decks, fun decks. That's where like meta stuff ruins everything, because I get why people do it, but there's a certain point, right? I always, if I made a game, I would always have that fun format, the gimmick format. Like, don't do the meta and somehow punish people for doing it, or you know, encourage people to do fun and different ideas, not just a zero-sum of like what's best, because that gets old. You can do that for a while, but then what, right? Like, don't you get tired of it? I don't know. It just, you want to really appreciate kind of what you're doing a little more, and so yeah, I'll mess around with that sometime, because I want to see how it plays on phone. And so we have Pokemon TCG Live. Oh wait, I forgot about that. Wait, so how many are there? I keep miscounting this because there's 2 Yu-Gi-Oh ones, so it's not 6, it's 7, right? It's Hearthstone, PvZ, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Magic, and Marvel Snap, right? So we can clown Marvel Snap for just being not a very good game, unless it needed like other modes, right? Maybe it has now. It needs other modes that make you feel like, okay, you know, it's just that don't end so short, right? Like that's hilarious, actually. Okay, I'm playing PvZ Heroes, right? And like I'm comparing the two. The PvZ is a very casual card game, you know, it's meant for like little kids or whatever it is. But you know, it's still good. But what I'm saying is, that one's fast-paced and, oh, you know, it's too simplistic. But Marvel Snap somehow one-ups it in that department. That one ends in 6 turns guaranteed, which is the most trash mechanic in the history of card games, and it shouldn't be forced, and it shouldn't be the only mode that you had there for a while. Maybe there's other whatever now. But even PvZ Heroes, like, okay, the games are fast-paced, and a lot of them could end in around 6 turns or, you know, short amount of time. But it's not forced, right? So it could end in 6, it could end in 20, it could end in, you know, 10, 15. Like, the fact that there's variance, like the fact that it always ends in 6 turns, like, that leads to such a limited scope. That's so trash. But that is one of the worst mechanics I've ever seen in my life. Again, I don't mind it being fast-paced. Like, okay, it ends on average by turn 10 or by turn 6 on average. But the fact that it's forced means, like how many turn 6s are going to be identical then? Not only are, okay, people using the same decks because of meta, and people are doing some of the same things over and over, but now it'll be exactly the same turn 6 because it's so predictable, right? It's really, really a bad mechanic. So Marvel Snap sucks. And I get to show off my Ben Broda art, I guess, again, if I do that. But yeah, we'll mess around with some of those because I want to test some of these, obviously, gaming streams on the iPhone just to see what it's like. Even though I've done it, obviously, a fair number of times. I kind of want to see, okay, I'll accept the fact that it's 720p. I don't really care, I guess, for the sake of these card games. Normally I'm a stickler for that, but it really can't be helped. There's no way it would work in 1080 on a consistent basis. So, right, but like, let me try to give my little description of each of those. Like, Hearthstone is one of the most fun card games of all time. That's why we're playing a bunch of gimmicks and stuff like that. I've played it certainly enough where I'm not, feeling like I'm missing any closure with it. I'm just kind of messing around. Magic is something I haven't really had a lot of experience with, so that's more fresh and kind of new and novel, and kind of, I was still messing around with like hexproof and gimmicks, but I was kind of just soaking it in. I wasn't trying to really do anything too noteworthy, but that one's much more fresh to me. Pokemon's also more like that, of fresh experience. I kind of want to experience a lot of the older cards rather than some of this power creep down nonsense. And then, because that's what you got to understand, right? You might think, oh, the original Pokemon is old news now, but if you've never played it, then why does it matter? You wouldn't say that with any of the games, like, oh, the old school Pokemon card game is somehow outdated. So even if you're playing it for the first time in any form, right, Pokemon, you'd say, oh, but play the newer cards, that's just better or whatever. But the problem is that you wouldn't say that with like, oh, Leaf Green, Fire Red, or whatever, right? You wouldn't say that you wouldn't say that, oh, those games are old news, so don't play them, right? Or this is one way that I clown the Pokemon games in multiple senses. I've said this a couple times. Like, the problem with Pokemon games is often that you spam the A button through the first 60% of the game and just do the same move over and over with the same Pokemon over and over, like a strong Pokemon out in front. And it becomes very repetitious and mindless, and you don't have to use much strategy. It's so simplistic because it's a 1v1, right? The majority of the time, I know there's double battles and Pokemon Coliseum and stuff, but generally it's a 1v1, and you only have 4 moves to choose between. So it becomes very, very much just like spam the A button, and you don't have to strategize much at all. And there's not much room to do that. So I could kind of clown that by comparison to like Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy, you have like 4 units at a time, or and the enemies can have multiple at the time. So 4 or 5, or it depends on what game, but I'm thinking about like Final Fantasy 4. So that's the problem. So compare Pokemon to like Final Fantasy, where Pokemon has a 1 unit versus 1 unit generally. So that's much more simplistic than multiple units versus multiple units like Final Fantasy games. There'll be multiple enemies, you have multiple characters. Each character has way more than 4 options, whereas Pokemon only has 4 options. So that's much more complex. Or even compared to like Paper Mario type games, the Mario and Luigi stuff, where there's action commands. That's something I feel like maybe modern Pokemon games have added at times, or I'm not sure. I've never heard that, but I feel like you would think they would have tried that with at least one of them, or they should. So action commands were like, you do an ability or a move, right? But then you, based on your timing or how you execute like a little mini game, right, a little QTE type thing, based on that, it'll do more or less damage or be more or less effective, right? So that's a very fun thing because that makes it much more exciting. So now it's a combination of the strategy. You might say, well, old school Yu-Gi-Oh was simple and a lot of the monsters didn't have effects, but you could have 5 monsters out continuously like that, or they can be activated at any time in a way that you can in Yu-Gi-Oh. And so you have so many options there. So even though you could clown old school Yu-Gi-Oh a little bit and say it seems simplistic, it's actually much more complicated than you might think, because there's so many variables of how these things can all arrange together. Whereas, so I feel like people jump to the new kind of stuff, but you've never really truly fleshed out or enjoyed the old thing, because there's so many cool things you can do. That's kind of what my gimmick decks and Hearthstone show and stuff. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do that's just interesting and enjoyable regardless of anything else. So yeah, that's what I'll do. This kind of hijacked my topic of, whatever absolute philosophy I was talking about, but whatever, we're going to play card games later as a form of high favoritism to distract ourselves from the cognitive dissonance that we can prime and say that we're subject to. Whereas again, everything you do could be related to, it's like this. You would think you would take comfort in that, like, oh, it's a good thing and you're happy about it. The fact that that you're like relative comforts and you have this, like sort of luxury in society, but it's kind of a trade-off, like, oh, entitlement or something. But you didn't choose to necessarily be in this state, so it's kind of like we can adequately overcompensate or distract, but the inherent tendency and potential of humanity isn't like that, where uniformly you would just do that. So you're kind of taming and training people like animals. Like, what if a person wants to do that? They'll be a minimalist. Everything they do is related directly to their survival, right? And they'll live with the results, but they're not allowed to do that. See, that's where it goes off the rails, where it kind of supersedes your free will. That's why a lot of things are like, you take contrivance, the current state, for granted, and then you question everything from there. That's why it's like, oh, if we, like the simulation theory type thing. Like, you see the creation of the simulation in front of you. It's called society, and it's called, the indoctrination of everything you experience every day. You're being, again, trained and tamed like an animal, collective, because you're kind of looking at human beings through a special egotistical lens, which is actually used to control you. If you look at human beings just objectively as they are, like, okay, they just exist, they're just animals with slightly greater intelligence, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like, then you realize it's not some lofty thing. So you realize, oh, you're being socially engineered and conditioned and pressured every day, and you're being, controlled in this way, and like, so that's all it is. You're being tamed and trained like an animal. So it can serve its purposes, but it kind of, is not an absolute the way that you might think. That you treat it as like something else, kind of lack of self-awareness and also lack of like accountability. You kind of make an exception for it. Right, like you wouldn't look at animals doing what they do in nature, and it just kind of is what it is, right? But with humans, you place a special framing. That's part of indoctrination, but that's kind of, right, the prerequisite that shouldn't be. All of that is not necessary, and now you're free in nature, even with the conflicts that come with that. But yeah, I'll try to do that later, I guess. See, I feel, again, I'm a little OCD about that. Like, I feel bad for doing that. Like, oh, it's my first time ever playing Magic. Not, like, literally first time. Obviously, I played it for, like, a year, or it felt like close to a year. But, it's like, it just, whatever. It feels like it dampens the experience a little bit, that it's supposed to be more meaningful than that. But now it'll be on mobile, it'll be 720p, like, is that really? But these are the kind of games that feel suited for that, I guess, because they're easy to play on there. It won't suffer for controls, as long as you can kind of see the cards and what's going on, right? It almost shouldn't matter too much. Yeah, it's a rejection of the ego basis that would be, because again, the ego is used to control yourself and others. Ego gratification from a trained state is definitely considerable, and right, that level of ego gratification is like, that's why people are controlled by their preconceived notion of false absolutes. So, endlessly, so you'll kind of dance around it. Like, something is supposedly absolute, but then you face a cognitive dissonance constantly of the fact that it's not absolute. So, that just shows you how you're controlled, but it doesn't, really validate anything. So there's an incentive of this longevity process that's subversive to true full value. and that's kind of how society is organized. Overextended, stimuli acme preservation as the basis there. So, there's a built-in subversive quality to that. Yeah, this is just a bonus. I'm going to start trying to do this if I'm going to flesh out. The main issue is the batteries that I sometimes run out. If I run out of juice for the Starlink. It held up pretty well though here. Yeah, like 60 some odd percent. These views are pretty nice that you get here, but 720p no less, and in motion, and with some stupid clown talking in the background. Yeah, like the ego basis is used to control you, and the reason why is because like why should you get ego from anything? And it's like, some zero-sum process, but that assumes too many things. Like, it assumes intent, it assumes it's a zero-sum process for self-interest, so either do it or don't do it, and you can do it more or less efficiently, but it doesn't really prove anything, because like, first of all, nothing is really necessary like that in nature to that extent. Like, people need very little to survive or whatever, so ego is like overextended well beyond that, right? It's not a necessity, it's not anything like that, but it's also kind of like, why would you get ego from something? It's kind of like, oh look, I worked harder to make more money, versus somebody who doesn't work as hard and makes less money. But it's like, oh, maybe they don't require as much, maybe they don't care, maybe they're not materialistic, maybe you're just selfish and possessive and greedy or something. So, that's the opposite interpretation concept. Like, maybe that's exactly what they want. Maybe they're fully aware and deliberate. But this is like a self-fulfilling fallacy, even like with this sort of observational basis, right? It would be like society would prevent you from doing it, and then use that to validate. See, you're not doing it, therefore that means it's not valuable, or right? Like, that's the self-fulfilling nature. You'll say this to like a kid or something, right? And there are some exceptional ways to overcompensate and bypass that still, but like, oh, look at this kid. Like, children rely on parents, right? Meanwhile, you restrict them in every way with the pretense for their own safety. But like, at the age of 7, like, oh, you're restricting. Oh, you can't go outside at a certain time. You have a curfew. We have to watch and restrict everything you do. And then we'll use that to say, see, you rely on us. Maybe that 7-year-old could go out and catch fish and pick berries, and maybe they could do that, but you won't let them do it. That's the difference, right? So it's not, oh, they rely on you, but it's like you are holding them back. Maybe they could do that, but you're not letting them. And even adults in the same way, like, who knows what you could do, but you're not allowed to really do it, right? You can't even attempt to do it. You can't even make that choice. That's the problem with the machination process. Overextension is like, you need like some almost religious pretense, like Amish or something, that sort of lifestyle. Like, you wouldn't almost be even allowed to do that. That's the problem, right? There's a lot of regulations and things that might seem like, oh, it's for some safety or something, but it's for nothing more than reinforcing the specific contrivance state that you're a part of, machination process that you're a part of. But yeah, these are some good discussions. I'm going to go into more in-depth topics, and I want to incorporate that reaction content into this too. Kind of combine the two, like absolute philosophy and being a film critic, and like doing both together. It's like really what you're doing with that is you're searching for the meaning of it. You're not just reacting at a surface level. You're kind of looking like, what is really the point of this? And what is it telling us? How can it affect our real lives? So what else do we have here? Like basically, how many eras of human civilization can we fall for that same trap of basically we think everything is absolute and we think, our way is the right way and we got it right this time. It's similar to religion, like you think every other one is wrong and yours is right. Like the unknown, right? They all fit into that same psychological category, and I'm not even necessarily dismissing them because of that. It can have positive psychological effects. It can give people structure. It can make people, behave in a better way potentially, right? In a more moral way, etc., etc. So it can have positive impacts on people, but it's part of that same psychological process of, that all religions fit in the same category, right? Versus, oh no, one is actually true and all the others are not, right? Which is a harder case to make. And then the same is true, like again, that, oh, this time we got it right. Our society is perfect and unquestionable, but we'll condemn all of those in the past. It really shows you that people's perception and care is very selfish and narrow. Like, oh, they have their bread and circuses, so they don't really care. They'll pretend to care as a pretense just to, selectively apply. But again, initial minded, they're not aware of the larger process. And it wouldn't lead to a specific contrivance state in the same way, universally. That kind of shows you a subversive nature right there. People would rather pay more attention to folly favoritism and get invested in that, because there's no burden of consequence, etc., than they would in real, like what I'm doing now, or anything like objective thought or psychology, philosophy, whatever. That they would dismiss. But folly favoritism, something that's not real, that has no impact on their life, that they would get invested in. That shows you right there, it's a non-value subversive state.